Always true.
Foreign Minister of Türkiye, Hakan Fidan, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera. As I'm sure you're aware, the US President says Türkiye has conducted what he called an unfriendly takeover of Syria, something he says Türkiye has wanted for thousands of years. How do you respond to that? Did Türkiye conduct an unfriendly takeover of Syria?
Well, I think, first of all, let me say this, we wouldn't call it a takeover because it would be a grave mistake to present what's been happening in Syria for Syrian people is not a takeover. I think if there is any takeover, it's the will of the Syrian people which is taken over now.
Would it then be not correct to characterize Turkey as the power which will rule Syria in the final or in the end?
Well, I think that will be the last thing that we want to see because we are drawing huge lessons from what's been happening in our region because domination culture itself has destroyed our region. Therefore, not Turkish domination, not Iranian domination, not Arab domination, but cooperation should be essential. So therefore, we are not looking at the case right now. Our solidarity with Syrian people shouldn't be characterized or defined today as if something that we are actually ruling Syria. I think that would be wrong.
It's been reported in the US media, quoting US senior officials, concerns from the US that Turkey might be about to launch a major cross-border offensive to try and crush the SDF, the YPG. These are the Kurdish forces in Syria. Is that the case? Is that what Turkey intends to do?
Well, I think, as you know, the PKK extension of Syria, YPG, has been an essential threat to Turkey. But what YPG is playing as a major role to sustain its presence and dominance over the occupied places, they disguise themselves as a group who is helping the West in fight against ISIS. I think this is a misrepresentation of their true identity. They are there as a terrorist organization. If we holify every group who has fought against ISIS, so we have to take into account some other states and the groups in the region too. Every actor in the region fought against ISIS for different reasons. But overall, as you know, I mean, YPG is an extension of PKK, and they are filled with their ranks, people from Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and some European countries. They are listed as international terrorist fighters. And however, but unfortunately, our Western friends, they turn blind eye to this fact that YPG is an extension of PKK.
In fact, the US Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, in 2016, confessed to Congress that there is a link. The way he put it, I think, was that the YPG is aligned with the PKK. Of course, the US considers the PKK to be a terrorist group. Do you then call upon the US to stop their backing for the SDF, the main component of which is the YPG?
Well, we've been calling upon them for some time.
What response do you get? The response,
I think it all started during the time of the President Obama. Their explanation to us then was this was going to be a temporary arrangement. But
that's clearly not the case.
No, that's clearly not the case. It turned out to be a very long one. Starting from the last year, we've started having some discussions with the American administration on how to address this issue, because this is clearly threatening Turkish national interest. But we don't want to disturb certain balances in the region, but we have to keep our national interests to be observed and saved. So we are talking to them.
For viewers listening to your answer then, Mr. Foreign Minister, does that mean that perhaps Turkey is getting ready to launch a major offensive? What the sources are talking about is uniformed Turkish commandos gathering artillery near Kobani. Is there a possibility that there may be a big Turkish offensive?
Well, let me state this. I mean, there is a new administration in Damascus now. I think this is primarily their concern now. So I think if they address this issue properly, so there will be no reason for us to intervene.
What do they need to do? Do they need to take back control of all of Syria?
Absolutely, absolutely.
From the Turkish perspective, can there be a Kurdish, shall we say, autonomous region or a Kurdish entity within Syria, or does that necessarily equal a threat to Turkey?
Well, I think it wouldn't be proper for me to speak about Syrian people, to speak on behalf of the Syrian people. This is up to Syrian people to decide. But what I can say, as Turkey's wish and policy, we would like to see civilian Kurdish people, Arab people, and Turkoman people to leave their original places, and they shouldn't be disturbed. They shouldn't be forcibly removed from their hometowns and villages. And if anyone who had to immigrate somewhere else should be able to come back again. But in short, so the Kurds, especially civilian ones, should be able to live where they are.
If the transitional government or the authorities that take over long-term in Damascus, if they manage to take back control of all the territory that Syrian Kurds currently hold, what would that mean for the future of Turkish troops in Syria? Does that mean Turkish troops leave Syria?
Well, as you know, I mean, there were two major objectives of Turkish presence in Syria. One is to prevent further mass migration to Turkey, because under opposition control, there used to, still today, I mean, 5 million people were living under opposition control, and then counterterrorism issues were primarily important for us. Right now, when we see that those two major concerns are eliminating, we have no reason to stay in Syria, and we see now right steps is being taken in the right direction.
So you think things are going in that direction?
I mean, initially yes, but it's just a very new now. I think it's just been almost 2 weeks, so we need to give them some more time to see how it will evolve.
On that point, how does Turkey now view the transitional authority which is taking over in Damascus? Do you view it and recognize it as the legitimate authority and government of Syria?
Well, we recognize as the current administration, the new one, as a legitimate partner for Turkey and for international interlocutors. This is why we have started communicating with them. We reopened our embassy, and we instructed our ambassador to be in touch with the local and central officials.
And we've heard from senior EU officials like Ursula von der Leyen talking about how they're instructing as well direct contacts with the new administration. But the EU Foreign Ministers meeting on December the 16th decided not to lift sanctions on Syria. Do you think they should have?
Well, there was a meeting. I think eventually they'll do, because what we...
Have you been given that message from the EU that
today,
they will lift?
Right before this program, we had a president of Madame von der Leyen. She was visiting Turkey, and there was a good meeting between her and President Erdogan. So the message that we received, if right steps is taken by the government, the administration in Damascus, I think they are ready to lift the sanctions, because they recognize the very fact that, sanctions and development and return of immigrations cannot be used at the same time, because you've got to get rid of the sanctions in order to let the new government to take some steps in the direction of development to address the basic needs of the people and to create an environment where refugees can return.
And to do that, you would need to recognize the authorities in Damascus as legitimate. Do you think the EU and the US should do that? They should recognize the authorities in Damascus as a legitimate government at this point?
Well, I think there are two types of definition. Sorry, one is the legal definition. The other one is the practical steps. Now we are talking about the practical steps. The communication with the government in Damascus and contacting them, meeting them, have already started. We are seeing the officials from UN, EU, and some other European countries. They've been contacting with the government in Damascus.
The HTS, the main component of the, shall we say, the coalition that's governing Syria, it remains on Turkiye's terror list. Is it time to remove them, do you think?
Well, I think it's time for international community, starting from UN, to remove their name from the terrorism list because...
So Turkey would wait for a move in the international community or in the United Nations first?
No, I wouldn't say yes, because we will be taking a different step, because what we had done in the past, that was in accordance with the UN Security Council decisions. So I think in the light of the recent developments, we can take another decision.
You mentioned the Syrian refugees. Will they be sent back home now to Syria from Turkey?
No, we are not going to send them back. We hope them that voluntarily, safely, if they wish to go back, judging the new environment, so they are welcome to go back.
Mm. Do you think the environment is moving in that direction?
Well, the figures are, telling the current trend. Now, when we look at the current the figures who are indicating the number of people going back, actually, we see a slow increase in number of people who are going back. So I think as we see more stability and more safety, more people will eventually go back. And this is too early at the moment for many people.
You obviously have, as you mentioned, direct contact with the new authorities in Damascus. What is your reading and understanding of them, of the HTS? When we hear from Western officials, a lot of concern at times about the HTS's past, connections with groups like Al-Qaeda. Are you convinced, Mr. Foreign Minister, that the HTS has cut those links, it's moved on from that time?
Well, I think so. I think so because, before this job, I was director of our intelligence agency for 13 years, and Idlib was just next to us as a border town. So we've been closely following terrorist and terrorist-linked activities. I think HTS has taken huge steps in divorcing itself from Al-Qaeda and Daesh and other related radical elements.
What do you think is more likely when you make a judgment call, Mr. Foreign Minister, that peace and stability will prevail and the institutions in Syria will prevail? Or do you think it's more likely at this point that there will be some degree of infighting between the different factions?
Well, I hope we don't see that, because infighting would be the last thing that we would like to see, and that's why we are making constructive advices for all the opposition groups to come together and to have a unified government, because the urgent needs of Syrian people cannot be delayed anymore, because we've got to get back all the refugees back to Syria. Then there are some institutional problems. The bureaucracy and public services, unfortunately, broken now, so they have to be reinstated. So, and the basic services, the health, transportation, food, education, communication should be provided to the people, so the people can feel the normal life, actually.
Excellency, you told NTV channel on December the 13th the most vital issue that needed to be done was for the Russians not to enter the equation. You went on to explain that the Iranian foreign minister came. We got together with the Russians and Iranians in Doha, and we talked about certain issues. If the regime had been supported, it could have been very bloody. Should we understand from that actually you convinced the Russians and Iranians not to continue trying to save the Assad regime?
Certainly, we have discussed with them, and we have communicated with messages to them, because, as I said, I mean, we drew very big lessons from our near past.
So how did you do it? So how did you convince them? What was, I guess what I'm trying to say is, what was offered to them? Did they receive any guarantees? What did they ask for in return not to try and save the Assad regime?
Well, we have an open and frank discussion with them. We have open and frank discussion. We put every matters on the table, try to address them one by one, and and the Russians and the Iranians, they've been in Syria for a long time, and they know exactly how the Syrian regime is going in the negative direction. So they are very much familiar with the problems of the old regime, the Assad regime. So I think at some point they come to conclusion that our messages are also right.
Did they receive any guarantees that their presence could continue after the fall of the Assad regime?
Well, I cannot talk on behalf of the Syrian people and the Syrian government, so I am not in a position to give them any guarantee.
Was Turkey aware of the Syrian opposition's plans to try and make a push first for Aleppo and then, Hama and Homs and Damascus before this major offensive began?
No.
So were you trying to catch up with events?
Well,
as they were?
We know for a long time that especially HTS, they had the intention of doing so. But our position was always, because of our two primary concerns, because as a result of greater destabilization in Syria, bigger migration influx and the increasing level of terrorism. So we knew for the last 2 or 3 years that the region was very much weak. Any surprise military offensive from north will result in some sort of success on the side of the opposition forces. But there was no guarantee that whether the Iranians and the Russians would use heavy weapons and start bombing indiscriminately, especially the civilian population, thus causing a lot of terror and panic and shock within the opposition controlled places. So therefore, this was our understanding. But right now, when they decided to, our job was to contain it and to make sure that it goes smoothly, and that's why we thought that the diplomatic steps and efforts were particularly important.
Has the fall of the Assad regime increased Turkiye's influence? For those who analyze the situation and they say, Turkey is the key player now in Syria. Do you agree with that analysis, sir?
Well, I will say it certainly has increased Turkey's responsibility, because as a neighborly country, we've got to do our best, especially in extending technical assistance to the newly formed government, because the government institutions have bankrupt at the moment. No financial tools available, no banking system, even the airports are not working. So the new government has to work diligently to rebuild the country again.
And doesn't that increase Turkiye's power, though? Because as we're seeing these days, a lot of international figures coming to Ankara to speak with Turkey, perhaps to coordinate, because they see Turkey as the main address now.
Well, we would like to use this influence to mobilize more assistance, more cooperation with Syrian people. And this is the angle that we are looking at the case, because we don't want to see especially the regional countries having the impression that Turkey is dominating Syria in any way. So we would like to work together with our brotherly countries and other international actors in Syria, because we are not going to repeat a mistake that is being done by some countries in the region, because first of all, it will be a disrespectful behavior towards the Syrian people, and second of all, no one country can actually address all the problems of Syria. So we have to work together. So we have to, as I said, the culture.
Who are you working with? Is it Turkiye, Iran, Russia, and the US who are the main countries which are now having to agree on a way forward?
Well, I think at the moment, to address the development issues, the political stability issues, we need to work together with, starting from Iraq, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, around our neighborhood.
Is it possible for a new order to arise in Syria that keeps all of these disparate parties happy? I mean, obviously the interests of Iran, the interests of the United States, Russia, I mean, they have very different, shall we say, perspectives on issues. Is it possible for a new Syria to arise that is not caught in some kind of tension between these parties?
Well, certainly there will be some sort of tensions, because it's almost impossible to please everybody and to meet everyone's demands. But however, we should look at the principles, as international and regional community. What are the agreed principles that we are expecting from the new government in Damascus? A, we don't want them to see mixing up with terrorist groups, mainly ISIS and PKK. B, we don't want them to pose any threat to neighboring countries. C, we don't want them, treating badly the minorities, Christian, Alawites, Yazidis, Turkmens, the Kurds, and we want them to have inclusive government, and we want them to provide the territorial integrity, political unity, and sovereignty. Those are the agreed principles. I think as long as all the parties, interested parties, agree on these principles and communicate these principles and expectations with the government in Damascus. But
they say the devil is in the details sometimes. And I mean, if you take the first principle you mentioned, well, maybe in principle everybody would agree that Syria should not be used to support what they consider to be terror groups. But then the subject we just spoke about with the US backing the SDF and the YPG, that Turkiye considers to be a terrorist group, the United States officials have admitted is tied to the PKK, that they consider to be a terrorist group. I mean, do you consider in that scenario, for example, that the US is backing a terror group by supporting the YPG?
Yes.
And
we've told this openly many times.
And if that policy doesn't change, does that put you on a collision course with the United States, especially with the new administration that's coming into power?
Well, this is exactly what we've been trying to avoid for some years, managing not to have on a collision course with the United States, at the same time addressing the terrorism threat. So therefore, we established a deconflicting mechanism with the American forces in Syria. So while we were conducting our operations, intelligence and military operations against the terrorist targets, at the same time we were deconflicting with the Americans. So diplomatically, militarily, it was a challenging job, but so far we have brought here. But at the risk of always having a big confrontation, because as I said, they have their presence, we have our existential threat there. So now we both recognize this problem and we are taking steps accordingly. I know President Trump, when he was president, he instructed a couple times to give up from these policies, but nobody listened to him, unfortunately.
So I'm just putting all the pieces together of what you're saying, Mr. Foreign Minister. Does that mean that the likelihood of a conflict in interest between Turkey and the US is still very much there over Syria?
Well, I think we are coming to the end. We are coming to the end. We are wrapping up.
Has the US requested from Turkey not to launch a new major offensive against the Kurds? Has that been requested?
There is always emphasis on not to disturb ISIS related operations.
Right.
Because they cannot say to us, don't address your terror threat, because we are not, this is not something that we are going to listen, or they cannot.
And what is your response to them then?
Well, we are saying, look, we've got to find another way, because we will continue our operations, and international community, by the way, shouldn't be held hostage or shouldn't be blackmailed by PKK, YPG because of ISIS prisoners. So this is our message.
We've seen Israel launch strikes right across Syria. We've seen Israel move and grab more land in the buffer zone beyond the occupied Golan Heights. We've seen Israel announce, the Prime Minister announce, new settlement building in the Golan Heights. From your reading of it, does this to you look like a country which is simply trying to protect its security interests, or is taking advantage of the situation in Syria to frankly launch what many people would call a land grab?
Well, initial few steps that is being conducted by the first Israel in the first days of the events could have been read as some security measures, but after the declaration of Netanyahu's government, the doubling down the population in occupied Golan Heights, I think now this is a new dimension. Now we are seeing a huge provocation on the side of the Israeli side. I think Netanyahu government is not only genocidal, but it's also suicidal. They are not only threatening the future of our region, the Arabs and Muslims, but future of the Jewish and Israeli people, creating a huge bad legacy for the future.
Where does that leave everything that's happened in Syria? Where does that leave people in Gaza? Does that leave them more isolated on their own?
Well, I hope not, because as international community, starting from Türkiye, we will never leave them alone. We will do whatever it takes in our power to help them, to assist them.
But this is the, for example, if we listen to Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei saying on Wednesday, Assad's toppling was the result of a plan by the United States and Israel. So I guess from their perspective, they're saying this breaks what they call the axis of resistance. How do you see that?
Well, with all due respect to our Iranian friends, I mean, we've had this discussion maybe 1,000 times with them, because their presence in Syria didn't prevent a big genocide in Gaza.
Okay, Mr. Hakan Fidan, Foreign Minister of Turkey, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera, sir.
Thank you.